Jaafar Jackson turns 30 years old today, marking a milestone as the lead in the year's most significant cinematic release. Despite the massive public profile of the role, he managed to keep his casting a complete secret for an entire year. He withheld the news from his own family, including his father, Jermaine, the older brother of Michael Jackson. His mother, Alejandra, was also kept in the dark, while Jaafar began a rigorous process of changing his voice and movement to match her former brother-in-law. This period of isolation allowed him to develop the character without the immediate pressure of his family's expectations or the weight of their collective history. Jaafar's background is a blend of two distinct cultures, connecting the Gary and Deanna roots of the Jacksons with his mother's heritage in Bogotá, Colombia. He grew up at the center of a musical dynasty, surrounded by uncles and aunts who defined the sound of several generations. Yet, as a child, he showed no interest in the family business. His actual goal was to become a professional golfer. He didn't start singing or dancing until he was 12, and he remained a relatively private figure until releasing a single in 2019. This initial distance from the spotlight meant he arrived at the role without the habits of a lifelong performer, allowing him to study his uncle's style as a student rather than a mimic. The process of becoming Michael Jackson didn't start with a traditional studio casting call. It began with a single voice note Jaafar recorded in private, which he sent to producer Graham King to demonstrate his natural vocal resemblance. This triggered a 2-year window of extreme secrecy. On this timeline, the initial voice note sits on the left, followed by a long silence. The gap closed in December 2023, as data points represent the surge of global media attention following Lionsgate's announcement. With the role finally public, the focus shifted to a 2-year period of intense physical training. To prepare, he moved into Havenhurst, the family compound in Encino, where Michael Jackson had lived and written some of his most famous music. He dedicated a room in the house to research, creating a detailed timeline that mapped world events against his uncle's personal and professional records. The family granted him access to private journals and personal writings, providing a rare look into the motivations and thoughts behind the public image. He trained daily with choreographers who had worked on the original Hijayestria World Tour, focusing on the specific mechanics of Michael's dance style. One of his primary goals was recreating the Motown 25 performance of Billie Jean, a routine he had to rebuild and memorize frame by frame. He rehearsed until his feet were numb, often relying on his uncle's own studio mantra, "Let's go again." The quiet years spent in training allowed him to strip away his own habits and focus entirely on the technical and emotional requirements of the performance. When principal photography began in Los Angeles, the results of his private transformation were finally seen by the crew and the public. Director Antoine Fuqua noted a level of technical and emotional resemblance he described as spiritual, suggesting that Jaafar was capturing something deeper than a simple imitation. The family matriarch, Katherine Jackson, gave her public blessing, stating that she saw her son's spirit in Jaafar's performance. For his mother, Alejandra, the experience was emotional. She reported that while watching the film, it became difficult to recognize the son she raised. The 30-year-old man seen on screen today represents a significant shift from the child who once preferred the quiet of a golf course to the family business. By withdrawing for a year to focus on his craft, Jaafar Jackson ensured that the performance was grounded in study and heritage, preserving his uncle's story for a new generation. 10 years ago, almost no one outside his immediate family knew Jaafar Jackson's name. The boy from Encino mostly just dreamed of fairways and putting greens. But as he turns 30 years old today, his reality looks entirely different. He currently sits as the only lead actor in the history of cinema whose feature film debut has grossed over $1 billion at the global box office. Most debut performances rely heavily on established supporting casts to carry the commercial weight. Jaafar reached this milestone without a single professional acting credit prior to this production. This required pulling off a high-stakes, highly visible reclamation of the most heavily scrutinized legacy in popular music. For almost 20 years, the Jackson family has operated from a strictly defensive posture, constantly guarding Michael's memory against intense public distortion. At 96 years old, Katherine Jackson has carried the heaviest share of this burden, spending decades trying to protect her son's name from people who never actually knew him. To prepare for the role, Jaafar spent 2 years working in complete secrecy. He isolated himself in the Havenhurst research room, read private journals meant for no one else's eyes, and drilled choreography until his feet bled, keeping the entire process hidden even from his own parents. Because of the immense outside pressure, accepting this role served as a critical family defense strategy that demanded severe personal sacrifice to execute. The emotional epicenter of the film's release actually took place before the worldwide theatrical run. On April 13, 2026, the production held an advanced screening in Gary, Indiana. Jermaine, Jackie, and Marlon traveled back to the literal streets they grew up on, walking where the original Jackson 5 formed in 1964. During the event at the West Side Leadership Academy, Gary's mayor and the Indiana state senator presented Jaafar with the key to the city. To the family standing on the red carpet, this homecoming represented pure vindication. A Midwestern community was finally reclaiming its hometown hero after watching his story get picked apart by outsiders. 11 days later, on April 24th, Michael officially opened to the global theatrical marketplace. This chart illustrates the sheer scale of the film's initial domestic weekend. The previous record for a musical biopic stood at $60 million, set by Straight Outta Compton in 2015. Michael launched with roughly $97 million. Audiences quickly began returning for second and third viewings, shifting the momentum from a standard theatrical release into a widespread cultural event. This momentum spilled onto social platforms, pushing a 50-year-old discography like Human Nature and Billie Jean back up the streaming charts. Dominating the conversation, the film forced a younger generation to interact with Michael Jackson as an active, living cultural force, rather than a historical artifact. By mid-July, after 12 weekends in theaters, the production crossed a threshold that no biographical film had ever reached, $1 billion globally. Trotting the all-time highest-grossing biopics, Bohemian Rhapsody topped $900 million. Oppenheimer hit $976 million. Michael completely cleared both. Looking at internal studio records, it also surpassed 2013's The Hunger Games: Catching Fire to become Lionsgate's highest-grossing film ever. Director Anton Fuqua called the milestone deeply humbling, crediting the tireless work of a massive crew operating with a shared vision. A 29-year-old newcomer carrying the incredible weight of a global icon effectively anchored a massive billion-dollar tentpole franchise for the studio. Behind the historic financial data lies a deeper emotional resolution for the people who actually lived through this story. Jermaine Jackson has now watched his own son step onto the screen and carry the family name to its absolute commercial peak, closing a loop that started in Gary over 60 years ago. Coleman Domingo, who portrayed Joe Jackson, noted that Jaafar avoided simple mimicry, opting instead to deeply understand the specific psychological intention behind every single one of Michael's physical gestures. For the first time in nearly 2 decades, the Jackson family is no longer forced to defend their legacy. They are watching the world celebrate it on their own terms. The story is actively expanding. Lionsgate confirmed that roughly 30% of a sequel, reportedly titled Michael 2, has already been shot using material captured during the original production. The second film explores much heavier, complex chapters of his life and career, including the massive construction and ensuing isolation of the Neverland Ranch. To handle the intense legal battles and later eras, the studio is reportedly utilizing a non-linear structural approach, weaving together different periods rather than following a single timeline. Which brings us back to today. Jaafar's 30th birthday serves as the culmination of an incredibly risky cinematic gamble that paid off. As he prepares to step back into the shoes of the world's most scrutinized icon for round 2, he brings with him the proven confidence of cinema's biggest leading man,